Seemingly out of the blue, an obscure Oregon government agency was suddenly in the limelight for big issues and big drama. Never heard of the Office of Public Defense Services? You're probably not alone. But it's an agency with an important mission, and many of its issues aren't new. I'm Andrew Thien, and this is Beat Check with the Oregonian. Up next, investigative reporter Noelle Crombie. We talked about the dust-up between the top official at that agency and the state's chief justice, why Oregon has so many people waiting for a public defender, and much more. A programming note. We recorded this interview before Steven Singer was fired by a new 9-member state commission. He likened the state's chief justice to an autocrat like Vladimir Putin during his last meeting as a leader. But the larger issues are all still relevant. Here's our conversation. Noelle Crombie, thanks for coming back on the show.
Thanks for having me.
So, Noelle, we've talked at great length throughout the past 2+ years during the pandemic at various points on this podcast about issues with the criminal justice system in Oregon. But you've recently reported on the crises facing the state's Office of Public Defense Services, and that's a new one for me. How did this story get on your radar?
Yeah, this is a rather small state agency with a very big job. It administers the state's public defense system. It does not directly employ public defenders, like, say, a DA's office has prosecutors. Instead, it sort of administers and funds a network of lawyers, from independent public defenders to public defense offices like Metro Public Defender in Portland. And I've heard for several years about the growing crisis in public defense in Oregon, and that issue really took the spotlight in the past couple of months, mostly over the management of the agency.
Yeah, and we'll get into some of that in a little bit, but I think a lot of people might not really know. Maybe they have an idea of what a public defender is from watching Law and Order or or maybe their experiences with the legal system in general. But can you explain, what is a public defender and who qualifies for one?
I mean, the issue of a public defense or defense is essential to the criminal justice system. The U.S. Constitution guarantees the rights of people who are accused of a crime to a number of things, among them defense counsel. And right now in Oregon, there are not enough lawyers to represent people who qualify for public defenders. We're talking about people who have to meet certain income levels, what the system describes or characterizes as indigent defendants. And so, Oregonians should care about a large and growing by the day number of individuals facing criminal charges who lack a defense lawyer. They're entitled to that. The bottom line is right now we have people in jail in Oregon without attorneys. So there's no one to argue for their release or to protect their legal rights during the process.
Yeah. So how did we get to this point, Noelle, where, according to your reporting, something like 1,000 people don't have public defenders in Oregon?
Yeah, this has become a pretty breathtaking crisis that's unfolded in Oregon. It has snowballed to the point where, as you said, we've got nearly 1,000 people who are accused of crimes, who qualify for public defenders, and yet don't have one. The system has had a history of being underfunded and lacking in resources. The American Bar Association examined Oregon's system earlier this year and concluded that it needs an infusion of more than, I think the number was something around 1,000 lawyers to adequately address the problem. But the history of high caseloads and low pay have not exactly created prime recruiting conditions. There was another kind of like landmark report that's often referred to when discussing public defense in Oregon. It was commissioned a couple of years ago, and it too found systemic problems with the agency itself, that the agency fails to provide proper oversight of lawyers who do public defense, that some public defense lawyers are paid to represent clients, but they lack qualifications and experience for complex criminal cases. So the problems are numerous and systemic and significant, and that's the environment that Steven Singer inherited when he came to Oregon last winter.
Okay, and tell us about Actually, before we get to Steven Singer, so just one question. So is this one of the many issues, Noelle, that people aren't going to law school and then going basically in Oregon to become public defenders just at an elemental level? Is that one of the issues?
Yeah, I think that's an issue. The pay does not make it a particularly attractive position, and and the pandemic has like all sectors of American work has also been a disrupting factor.
Hmm.
So the reasons are complicated, and they boil down to the lack of just numbers. They just don't have enough people in the system to do this work.
Got it. Okay. So that brings us to Steven Singer. You just kind of teed that up that he arrived in Oregon a year ago or in this position a year ago.
That's right. He was hired in December of last year. The state struggled to find a candidate for this position. Mr. Singer had a long history in public defense. He's worked in Louisiana and Chicago. Louisiana news outlets had reported that he'd been fired a couple of years ago from the Louisiana Capital Assistance Center
Hmm.
in what one news organization described as an acrimonious departure. In his short time, he's had equally strong supporters and detractors. The public defense community is somewhat split on Mr. Singer. Some have welcomed his passionate advocacy and commitment to public defense, and they believe that he is the right person to make the kind of big reforms that and address these big issues that I just described.
Right.
But others thought his tactics were over the top and alienating, and it just so happens that some of the people he alienated were among the most powerful people in government, people like the Chief Justice, the chair of the commission that hired him. The governor, according to one account, asked him to consider stepping down. According to multiple people, he alienated lawmakers, key lawmakers, on whom the agency depends for funding. So he's in his short time developed enough kind of adversaries who were really critical to the agency's functioning and success.
So we're talking at a point where his immediate future is a little unclear. So in the intro, we'll tease that out if we know more by then. But I mean, this is just kind of a unique situation on a number of fronts, Noelle. I mean, there's so many volunteer citizen commissions that or whether it's the Fish and Wildlife Commission or the Oregon Transportation Commission or all these commissions, and they are typically appointed by the governor, obviously with help from staff and lawmakers, putting in their suggestions. But this commission that ultimately holds the keys to the fate of the head of this agency reports to a judge. Is that unique in state government?
In Oregon, the Public Defense Commission, this is the commission that hires and fires the executive director of the Public Defense Services, that falls within the judicial department of the state. And the head of that department is the Chief Justice. And so the Chief Justice, Martha Walters, has been heavily involved in the public defense crisis because of how this commission is structured. She is one of 7 elected justices to the Oregon Supreme Court. She was chosen by her fellow justices as the Chief Justice. She's been serving in that capacity since 2018. And this structure that I've just described was called out by the Sixth Amendment Center in its major assessment of the state's public defense system a couple of years ago. This commission, all of its members, it's got 9 members, are handpicked by the Chief Justice. And the center, this Sixth Amendment Center, thought that the process invested too much power in the judiciary, and it recommended that the Oregon legislature change this process and make it so the legislative and executive branches had as much stake in the state's public defense system as the judiciary currently does. But to date, that change has not been made. So the power for now rests with Chief Justice Walters, and we saw her use it to extraordinary effect this week.
Yeah, let's talk about that. I mean, you kind of teased a little bit that there is some acrimonious tension between Mr. Singer and Judge Walters. But what do we know of the nature of their disagreements and how it went from private to public in recent days?
The two have had a difficult relationship for for a while, and that's been an open secret that spilled into very public view when the Chief Justice publicly accused Mr. Singer of verbally attacking her in a previous encounter. And she said she would not consider any apology for him to be real. I just want to underscore how extraordinary this public meeting was. We have the Chief Justice for Oregon calling out a agency director for his treatment of her. She seemed to be drawing a line in the sand about what she would and would not accept as far as management of the agency. The commission failed to remove him that day, however, and set in motion this decision by Chief Justice Walters to fire the whole commission and replace them with what we can assume are people who share her view of Mr. Singer or who are at least willing to take some action to sideline or remove him entirely. That newly constituted, reconstituted commission will meet today. They're set to meet in executive session. They were set to meet last week to discuss Mr. Singer's performance in executive session, but he asked for that meeting to be public, and so we were able to publicly report on the grievances and issues that have arisen between Mr. Singer and the Chief Justice, as well as his issues with the chair of the commission, and that's where we learned that the governor had asked Mr. Singer to step down, although Mr. Singer disputes that account of his conversation with Governor Brown. And so this commission will meet later today. Multiple members who previously were on the commission have been returned to the commission. Most of them supported taking action against him. And then we have a handful of new members that Chief Justice Walters has appointed. So we'll see later today this will be a critical meeting for Mr. Singer and his future with the agency.
Underscore that again. We're talking on Wednesday, and through the power of editing and time, you will hear this on Monday. So we'll know a little bit more by then. But I just want to go back to the fact you've covered legislative issues or criminal justice issues for a long time. I mean, have you ever seen anything like this, Noelle, where, an entire commission was, cast aside?
No, I haven't. I think this has become an intensely political issue, and we rarely see this kind of, drama playing out so publicly. The chair of the commission issued this a memo that was more than 24 pages in length, detailing all of what he described as kind of intemperate, rude, unprofessional, unbecoming conduct by Mr. Singer. We also know that Mr. Singer has battled Marion County judges and called them out for appointing lawyers in his office to criminal cases. And so, this issue has been brewing for several months. I think it's a reflection of the crisis that faces public defense. There is a kind of a desperation around this. We do have a growing number of people who are not represented in the system. Their constitutional rights are not being honored when they don't have a lawyer. And so I think there's distress across the system, and this is one symptom of that.
Let's take a quick break, then we'll talk a bit more with Noelle Crombie, an investigative reporter for The Oregonian and Oregon Live. Let's stick with that thread of just kind of the tension on the system that you were just talking about, Noelle. I guess, what have you heard from people in the biz, so to speak, whether it's judges, attorneys, prosecutors, defendants, since you've started reporting on this? I mean, how are people feeling? I mean, this is not exactly what you want right now when you have this whole undercurrent of issues that you already outlined for us.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that people who work in and around this system are distressed to see this playing out. Even those without an opinion of Mr. Singer's leadership are watching this dysfunction and think it's not good for a system that, even in the best of times is, sort of beleaguered. And I think some observers view this ongoing conflict around Mr. Singer and the time that this has taken. I mean, the commission met for hours last week to discuss his performance. They see that as a distraction from what is a really critical problem facing the criminal justice system with this lack of public defenders. This is like a crisis with a capital C. We have people, just to underscore, people are in jail. They're being held in custody without attorneys. We also have, we've seen cases dismissed because of a lack of counsel. And these are cases with real victims. These are this is to not have a defense lawyer is not just a problem for the defendant. It can be a problem for a victim who is seeking and deserving of a justice and deserving of being heard through the criminal justice system, and they are deprived of that when the system isn't functioning properly. So Mr. Singer's issues with the agency are notable and newsworthy and really important, but they are playing out against a much larger backdrop of a crisis that will continue whether or not he remains with the agency.
Yeah, just to put a finer point on it, Noelle, so no defense attorney means no trial, right?
Yeah, it means the process cannot really move forward. There's just at the real basic level, there's no one, for instance, to argue for a person's release from jail. There's no one to walk the defendant through what their rights are through the legal process. This is a guaranteed right, and the system can't really function without it playing out. This is also playing out to various degrees around the state, and we're seeing it in places like Multnomah County, where it's especially acute just because of the numbers and the size of the county. Yeah, the public defenders or defense lawyers are essential to the system's functioning.
Just when I hear you describe kind of the constitutional right here, we are a litigious society, and that just springs to mind. Well, this seems like an opportunity for someone to say, their rights are being violated here because they don't have access to counsel. Is that something that we should expect more of, like litigation involving this issue? Is that already happening?
Yeah. In May, a number of defendants facing criminal charges filed a class action lawsuit against the state for its failure to appoint a defense lawyer. And, that lawsuit really raises, the stakes for the criminal justice system. I don't know how many people are named in the lawsuit at this point, but it is a class action, and those who were named, if I'm recalling from memory now, they had waited multiple weeks to get a lawyer appointed to them. And the lawsuit also alleged that the state's inability to promptly appoint defense lawyers was disproportionately affecting defendants of color.
Yeah. That's sadly based on all of your reporting and our colleague Max Bernstein and Amy Green through the years. That is not surprising. Okay, so how unusual is this situation to Oregon? Just not even taking into account the kind of the spat between Judge Walters and Stephen Singer and his fate, just the overall structural issues. Is this a national crisis, or is Oregon slightly worse than other states? Do we know?
I don't have a good handle on that, Andrew. I've just not spent time doing any kind of national reporting on this.
Yeah, well, you're kind of busy. Have a few irons in the fire, but usually Oregon is not, an outlier. Usually there's something more there than that meets the eye. So, what else should people know, or should I have asked you about this issue and kind of where we go from here? Obviously his fate is maybe sealed by the time people listen to this, but beyond that, all the other issues remain. Plus, you're going to have to find a replacement if that happens. So more time.
Yeah, I mean, I think in the very immediate term, we'll see what the commission does today. And they're expected to take up a review of his performance, and we'll see if he remains in place. That seems extremely unlikely given the politics and Chief Justice Walter's preferences at this point. But Mr. Singer aside, someone else is going to have to step into this agency, which has been described by many as, dysfunctional. Just the agency itself is dysfunctional, so then they're going to have to deal with, this broader issue of addressing the lack of attorneys and figuring out the path forward toward a healthier system, or more functioning system, I should say.
So beyond, an influx of people going to law school to be public defenders, are we talking about just we need more state resources allocated to this agency? Is that something that is a potential legislative fix?
Yeah, people have. I think that the problems are, or the issues are many, and one is just one of more resources, better pay for people doing the work, but also fixing some of the issues that have been systemic to public defense in the state. This issue of oversight of lawyers and coming up with a system that works better than the one that's in place now. It's the fixes are going to be, I would guess, undertaken over time and require the kind of relationships that it seems Mr. Singer was unable to build in his time here.
Well, it's a fascinating issue and something I learned a lot from your reporting in recent weeks and months dating back to when you first started addressing this. So thanks for all your work on it and for taking time to talk about it.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening to Beat Check with the Oregonian. I shared links to some of Noelle and my colleagues' stories about the public defense crisis in the episode notes. If you like this show, give us a 5-star rating and review in Apple Podcasts. It really helps other people find the program. And tell a friend. Help spread the word. The best way to support our journalism is through a subscription to Oregon Live. You can do that at OregonLive.com/pod support. Until next time.